Some communities go once we're not having any streetlights at all. Some communities go the entire other direction. We're going to have streetlights every 300 feet.
We're going to buy them, so that's just
We're much closer to the latter. Drive around at night and read just about everywhere in the city.
Yeah, I was going to say, even going up 69, there's like a light at every driveway, and it's like, okay.
It's not been in driving. It affects sort of the, but is that what people want in Bristol? Is that appropriate for us? Or should we recommend some modification to this in this part of the plan? Is the level of illumination too warm, too cold, or just about right?
I don't think it's ever been much of an issue here.
We're going to buy the lights, Paul.
That depends who you ask.
Oh, boy.
They're considering it. I think they're considering it.
Yeah, I think.
When you put this in here, what were you thinking about?
I wanted to ask you guys the question, because it's one of those issues that often flies below the radar screen, because people never talk about it.
Were you thinking in terms of how much is there or how much is there not?
I wanted for you guys to be able to say, and I think maybe Alan kind of summarized it, that it's not really sort of been an issue, that people appear now, based on this reaction, I think, that people are generally comfortable with the amount of street lighting in Bristol. It's not too much, too little, it's just about right.
If anything, they want more.
I think it's not
These are the
unlike.
people we hear from.
I think it's not unlike the issue of sidewalks in the community. Okay. In a rural community, sidewalks are like the devil, because sidewalks connote an urban environment, and that's not what our community is about. We're a rural community. We don't need sidewalks. And I've worked in a place like that, and suggest it was certain figurative death to suggest sidewalks in a subdivision. Okay,
Let alone both sides of the street.
right.
That's right.
Whereas in a community, a more urbanized community like Bristol and other similar communities, the idea of sidewalks, while it may still be somewhat controversial, the idea of walkability. You have neighborhoods that are compact, you have a downtown that's compact, people see sidewalks as a means of transportation, all the things we talked about before. So I think street lighting is not unlike that. There are rural communities that go, street lights, no, again, that connotes an urban environment, and we don't need to light up the night sky.
Addresses, yeah.
Alan's point is very well taken, especially because, as you know, I worked in a rural community, and in that rural community, we never talked about sidewalks. But a lot of site plans were looking at, dark skies, compliance with dark sky edicts, and advisories, and it's just interesting. This reaction here has been very interesting. That it's never really even come up. I can tell you it is almost religion where I came from, and the more lights, it was the death of the site plan. The troops would rise up, and it was unbelievable. So it's just the more lights, the better. They'd rather walk around in the dark. They really would. Bring a flashlight.
I guess I like that concept too. I think, you know what, this is first, outside of reading it and everything, but understanding how other communities and or we should think about it in Bristol. I'd like to not respond to this because I have no lights. But I know it's not reality.
This is when you start to talk about a community's character. It's easy to define in some places, because it's all the same. Other places, Bristol is one of those that's between it's not rural, it's not a huge city. It's right there in that area that's got a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of this. That's why you can't pin it down. And sidewalks probably fall right within some of that. I love sidewalks because I walk. And I think the word walk and sidewalk is there for a reason. And I don't want to get run over by what's out there. But you also have to clear the snow from the sidewalks. So I don't like sidewalks.
Well, and I...
That's one one issue.
know.
You're mentioning another one about the flashlights and everything.
Well, and I find it amazing that people leave their house lights on, their floodlights on all night long. And it's like,
Well,
when
that's
you're in
not
the
a street
house,
light.
turn it off.
No, it's
So
street light, it's part of the house.
it's right, but it's still a light, so I'm really torn between the
I agree.
subjects.
But I'm going to, at this point in time, I'm going to proceed on the basis that there's no groundswell to go
Right.
anything different than what we're doing.
Yeah.
So,
I would say-
years ago, I happened to, I was dating a woman at the time, and she said that come Halloween, we were going on a hayride. And I didn't know at the time, until Alan and I were out driving around Chipman's Hill. We went on a hayride that started somewhere in Bristol and went along a street that the view in the fall was unbelievable. And I don't think there were streetlights on that street, but just the lighting and the illumination. And I never realized, and if you said to me 10 years ago, well, you were in Bristol, I was saying, you're crazy, I wasn't in Bristol. Because we drove around and I realized what that view was. We were in Bristol. It's like, holy cow. Yeah, that view is awesome. So these things do add up in terms of streetlights and dark skies and some of these other philosophies, but I don't think there's necessarily groundwork for support.
No, I think we can have just a brief discussion on street lighting when we get to infrastructure or public facilities, but as far as the character of the community, like Alan said, it hasn't been.
Paul, you had mentioned blight earlier. Is this a good time to talk about that?
Well, the reason I brought it up under open space was because, at least informally, the commission has started discussion. The city's recently been very aggressive in acquiring and tearing down blighted homes, and the question now is, what do we do with these pieces of property?
I think we use
So I was
some.
wondering if that's why I said it is the open space time to talk about that. It might be a smaller issue than we want to get into in the plan of development, but that's the reason I asked the question there.
Any thoughts?
I'm not sure where we put it. Because open space is,
You're talking a lot, a building lot,
You could. So I mean, I think it could be, there are certain situations in some communities where they create what they call pocket parks, which is in a neighborhood which doesn't have a lot of green space. Any green space can be useful and valuable. So that can become a pocket park. The challenge in that situation becomes who maintains it. And if it becomes a city responsibility, and people say, well, the city doesn't keep it up, then it becomes kind of an obligation and a burden. There are some other communities that have dealt with this issue where they look for opportunities to deed the land to the adjacent parcels for little or no money, or they try to sell them if they can. But the issue is you give somebody responsibility now for that piece of land. The blight's eliminated, but now you're sort of adding some lawn space or green space or something to the adjacent properties.
Well, the city doesn't necessarily own them, like they either. They still own that banks.
That's true, because they don't necessarily, they demolish, they don't necessarily
Right.
require. And so then it becomes, it's the city's responsibility. But Paul brings up a good point. Should the plan have a policy on this? Should we
I think so.
advocate for case-by-case basis? What do you think?
I think so, because if it's being emphasized, and I willing to bet has been no thought to what's after that, and I think since it is a major program now, there should be something. Maybe it's all those things you're talking about, depending on what property it is.
Well, again, I think,
But where you put it in here, I don't know, is it by itself or?
Would it be the addition to the plan to what to do with the property after the blight has been removed? Or do you want to actually even have a statement about blight? Get back to the beginning.
Well, my concern is blight.
Oh,
Is
that's
blight
fine.
after is,
Before, during, and after.
different kinds of concerns though. Here I was talking about after.
Yeah, but I think Bob's question, I think, speaks to the larger issue, which is, should the planned conservation development articulate a policy about blighted properties, not what you do once they're gone, but one way to deal with blight is to encourage that properties be rehabilitated, and that the city, I think there have been efforts made even under the present situation to try to encourage people to, the demolition of the structure has been a last resort, and the city, I think, has attempted to encourage property owners to fix up their properties. But again, that speaks to a larger policy about, encouraging, if blighted conditions are going to be an issue not from, now into the future, that perhaps there needs to be something in the plan that speaks to how the city should approach, or at least how back up, that there should be a policy that articulates in an official document, the city's approach to dealing with blighted properties, so that there may be a hierarchy that, this is when the city encounters a blighted property, and this is regardless of who the mayor is or what the administration is, and that the policy is that, we try to do this, we encourage rehabilitation, should the city, be working with property owners and providing financial incentives to renovate and rehabilitate blighted property. Those can all be part of the conversation. And what happens if, in the worst case scenario, the structure has to be torn down? What should happen after that? Because I think there's some communities that would say, well, there's an opportunity for infill development. Putting another house back on there and putting the property back on the tax roll as opposed to other options. But that may be one of several. It may not be the highest priority. So I think there's an array of issues associated or outcomes associated with addressing blighted properties. So my sense is that it's probably an issue that should be addressed somewhere in the plan.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good point. And the legislature established a blight task force, which was supposed to have issued a report in the 2014 session. They didn't get it done, and the hope is that it'll get done. But there are a number of communities around the state that have been grappling with the issue of blight. And blight can be, defined differently in different communities depending on sort of where you come from. But the tools aren't all that great. It's sort of an all or nothing approach that, you encourage, you prod, you cajole, and then you get to demolition. So that's a pretty big gulp in the middle here. So I think what I'd like to suggest is that if you'll allow me to craft some language, I think a blight approach, I'm thinking of 3 steps right now. The first one is to try to prevent or minimize blight, because it really is a challenge for everybody, and we'd like to avoid that if we can. If we get into a situation where property is considered blighted, our first choice would be working with the property owners to improve or rehabilitate the property, to try to make it non-blighted, and do that. And then our third strategy is, if it's just not working out, and the next approach, I think we get into sort of a reuse strategy, which is it's now vacant property or vacant property.
It's either there or it's not.
And we're going to try to sort of move in that direction and try to improve that.
Comments? Just, yeah, no. I think part of the state's comprehensive economic development strategy tries to encourage putting small parking lots next to businesses where there's not a lot of parking access, like in our downtown over here. So I just wanted to suggest that.
Ellen, any comments?
Well, I think one of the reasons that the Code Enforcement Committee asked for your input was because there are various ways that we could approach this, and I think that there needs to be community buy-in. Obviously, the top goal is to keep or restore something to the tax rolls. However, density is a problem. So in some cases, especially in our highly dense neighborhoods, if a vacant lot could be created into off-street parking, especially which would be helpful during winter months or the summer months, if there's parties in the neighborhood, and it eliminates those street situations where there's cars where there shouldn't be. That might be an idea. Green space is always good, but I really do like the comment that was made about it being adjudicated on a case-by-case basis, because I think different neighborhoods have different needs. And we also do have some policies that we're developing, so I can forward them to you in terms of how we evaluate blight and some of the policies that we're using. We're also trying to have an interdepartmental response. So when something is deemed blighted by the standards that we use within the property maintenance code, there are resources offered to the owner of that property, some of which qualify, some of which may not, depending on the commercial nature, income, guidelines, etc. But there is a coordinated plan in place that I think could augment what you do here in terms of the long-term plan.
Thank you. And also keeping in mind that each owner has different circumstances and a different capacity to respond. And in addition to the neighborhood differences.
I think one of the things, and we're all pretty much on the same track on this, is that one of the values of putting a policy goal or a policy in place in the plan is it memorializes what the work of like task force or others, so that it doesn't get lost in, that was something that happened 10 years ago. Some committee did something, and then, we're 3 mayors down the road, and they can't, it's in a document that presumably is around and functioning, regardless of who the mayor is, regardless of who's on the council, regardless of who's on the planning commission, regardless of the staff is. It's the city's policy, articulated in an official document.
And maybe 10 years from now, the issue may not even be an issue anymore. I doubt it, but I'm hopeful that maybe it won't be an issue, and we'll revisit this, and we might not even have to have this in.
So this wasn't a chapter in the 2000 plan, but I think there's a couple things we've talked about. But I think I'd have to say that some of the other chapters tonight, I think we're like 90% of the way there. This one, I think we're more like maybe 50%. So I think that what's going to happen here is that working with Alan and Robert, I'll put something together, and I think it's going to require some additional assistance, et cetera, as we go.
Two quick things on this before we go. I know we got on page 19. The recommendations you have are word for word the ones in the cultural section. Is that
the reason? No, the reason was because the chapters were the same before, so I tried to split them up. So one discussion had to do with the cultural, and the other one had to do with sort of community character, because landscaping, for example, is an issue of community character, not cultural resources, et cetera. But I think this is probably going to end up being kind of a work in progress, so I'll take another stab at this.
The only other thought on this, it's back to what is community character, but you list a lot of physical things. But when you talk about community perception and brand, I think one thing that, right or wrong, Bristol's brand is for some of its residents and some out-of-town people is, for the city of its size, it has a very limited range of businesses. In other words, you can get 20 places where you can get a pizza, but if you want something good to eat, you got to go out of town. 20 or a dozen dollar stores, if you want to buy a suit, you have to go over to West Farms. So, I mean, would that be considered? I mean, I know you're going to talk about businesses and the economic development, but when it comes to the community character, right or wrong, I think that's the perception of Bristol.
It is, but I think the issue of branding and perception is such a delicate topic for the plan. We're not trying to beat ourselves up as part of the plan. What we are trying to do, though, is recognize positive strategies for the city for the future. So I think what you mentioned is an important consideration, but I don't think we should beat ourselves up too much on what we don't have and try to spin it about the types of things we would like to have and kind of do it in that way. So it's not that we're avoiding talking about it, but I think how we talk about it is something that needs to be done delicately. I'm still trying to get my hands on the branding report, the one that was, so I think there's elements of that that can be included in as part of this.
Next steps.
Yeah, just real quickly, I think there's 2 pages at the end.
Not done?
which is the issue of sort of sustainability and resiliency. These are new topics for a plan. I think it's important for us. Sustainability is about being kind of frugal in our use of energy and water and other natural resources. These are growing issues in the future and things that we need to start to be aware of. So there may not be any major changes that occur in the next 10 years, but there may be changes that are going to occur after that in terms of how we get around and do other things. And then the concept of resiliency really has to do with sort of hazard mitigation, emergency preparedness, and freak October snowstorms and all sorts of other stuff like that. And these are issues again. So I think that it's a minor element as part of the plan, but I just think it should be in. Next steps, I think I am continuing my interview process with people throughout the city, different city departments, and people involved with the city. Our next meeting, I think, is September 1? No, not 2.
No, it's the first Wednesday.
First Wednesday, so it could be the 3rd. I think it is September. Thank you very much. So our next topics will be revolving around the development strategies of the plan. Now, many years ago, it was called the Plan of Development. So this is really probably the meatiest chapter for us in terms of how we're going to be dealing with issues of downtown development, residential development, business development, institutional development, et cetera. And so, again, you'll get a booklet from me about a week before the meeting. If you work through it, we'll get together and talk about it and go from there.
We'll mail those out, or?
We'll do what we did. We'll mail them out. We'll also make them available over time. Two things very quickly. One is that Glenn will be meeting with the Zoning Commission at the end of August for about 45 minutes to an hour to get their input. I mean, they are, in some respects, they are the chief implementer of many recommendations, and that they've had great, as you have, they've had hands-on use of the plan of development since it was adopted, and I think we want to get their feedback and see what they feel are some of the issues facing the city and how well this plan is served. The second thing is, and I think the chairman and I have talked about this before, and I know you've talked about it, it's August, it's a tough time. We need to make sure that everybody on the commission, short of a life and death situation, is at these meetings. This is going to be this is an important document. It's going to be around for a long time, and it is going to be more useful to everybody if as many members of this commission as possible are sitting at this table. Obviously, many opportunities. Public engagement is important, a very important component, but so is the engagement of commission. I'm talking to the choir. So I think to the extent that we perhaps as chair can sort of do some follow-up, letting people know that, reminding them that it's really critical that they do their homework and show up.
Absolutely. You hear that, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
Motion to adjourn?
So moved. Oh, I can't say something.
So
Motion
moved.
to adjourn. So moved. Second. Aye. All in favor? Aye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was good. That was very good.
Yeah.
Thank you for the public
Thank you.
comment.